My name is Marcus Williams, and I still remember the exact taste of that turkey sandwich. It was dry, the bread slightly stale from the vending machine, but I was eating it anyway because I only had 30 minutes, and the cafeteria line was too long. I was sitting alone at a corner table in the break room of Hartwell & Associates, a mid-sized financial consulting firm in Atlanta, when my life changed forever. I had been with the company for 4 years. 4 years of arriving early, staying late, and delivering results that consistently exceeded expectations. 4 years of watching less qualified colleagues leapfrog over me for promotions. 4 years of hearing, "You're just not ready yet," while training the white men who got the positions I deserved. At 32 years old, I had an MBA from Howard University, a CPA license, and 7 years of experience in corporate finance. I had brought in 3 of the firm's largest clients through my own network and saved them nearly $2 million through an audit optimization system I developed on my own time. None of that mattered to them. The break room door opened, and I looked up to see Oliver Hartwell III walking toward me. Oliver was the CEO, the grandson of the company's founder, and the living embodiment of inherited mediocrity. He was flanked by James Crawford, the head of HR, and Liam Patterson, the chief operations officer. All 3 of them wore the same expression, a mixture of discomfort and poorly concealed satisfaction. "Marcus," Oliver said, not bothering with a greeting, "we need to speak with you." I set down my sandwich. "Of course. Should we go to a conference room?" "That won't be necessary," James said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. "This won't take long." Oliver remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest. "Marcus, we've made the decision to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. I had learned long ago that showing emotion in front of men like Oliver only gave them ammunition. They wanted to see me angry. They wanted the aggressive black man they had always believed me to be. "May I ask why?" I said, my voice steady. "Performance issues," Liam said quickly. Too quickly. "Performance issues," I repeated. "I closed the Henderson account last month. I brought in $400,000 in new business this quarter alone. It's not just about numbers." "Marcus," Oliver said, and I could hear the condescension dripping from every syllable. "It's about fit, cultural fit, leadership presence. The partners have expressed concerns about your communication style." There it was, the coded language I had heard my entire career. Communication style meant I didn't laugh at their racist jokes. Cultural fit meant I didn't golf with them on weekends or attend their church. Leadership presence meant I was black in a space they believed belonged exclusively to people who looked like them. "I have documentation of every project I've completed," I said. "Every client I've brought in, every dollar I've saved this company." If there were performance issues, why wasn't I ever placed on a performance improvement plan? Why wasn't I ever given formal feedback? James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The decision has been made, Marcus. We're prepared to offer you 2 weeks severance and a neutral reference." 2 weeks, I said. 2. After 4 years. "Take it or leave it," Oliver said. "Security will escort you to collect your belongings. You have 15 minutes. I looked at the 3 of them, these men who had smiled in my face for 4 years while sharpening knives behind my back. Oliver, who had once asked me if I played basketball because "you people are so athletic." James, who had accidentally called me by the name of the only other black employee 3 times in my first month. Liam, who had taken credit for my audit optimization system in a board presentation and never once acknowledged my contribution. "I'll need to speak with my attorney," I said, standing slowly. Oliver's face hardened. "Are you threatening us, Marcus?" "I'm informing you of my intentions," I said. "That's not a threat. That's professional communication, something you claim I lack." The security guard who arrived was a young black man named Darnell. I had spoken to him many times over the years. always stopping to ask about his family, his classes at the community college, his dreams of becoming a police officer. He couldn't meet my eyes as he walked me to my desk. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams," he whispered as I packed my things into a cardboard box. "This ain't right." "I know," I said, "but right doesn't always win in places like this." I packed methodically, making sure to take every personal item, but nothing that belonged to the company. I knew they would check. I knew they were probably hoping I would take something, anything, that would justify their decision, that would transform me from a victim into a villain in their narrative. As I walked through the office for the last time, I felt the eyes of my former colleagues on me. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others stared openly, already crafting the stories they would tell at happy hour. "Did you hear about Marcus?" Always knew he wasn't management material. Too aggressive, too angry. You know how they are. William Chen, one of the junior analysts I had mentored, stood up from his desk as I passed. "Marcus, It's okay, William," I said. "Keep your head down. Learn everything you can, and when you're ready, find a company that deserves you." He nodded, his eyes glistening. William was Chinese-American, and I knew he understood something about what I was experiencing. Not the same, but adjacent. The feeling of being perpetually foreign in spaces that claimed to value diversity while systematically excluding anyone who disrupted the comfortable homogeneity of power. Outside, the Atlanta sun was brutal, the humidity wrapping around me like a wet blanket. I put my box in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the building that had been my professional home for 4 years. I thought about my father, who had worked 30 years at a manufacturing plant, only to be laid off 6 months before his pension vested. I thought about my mother, who had cleaned houses for wealthy white families her entire life. Families who called her part of the family, but never invited her to sit at their tables. I thought about my grandfather, who had survived Jim Crow, who had marched with Dr. King, who had told me stories about water fountains and lunch counters, and the constant grinding humiliation of being black in America. "They will always underestimate you," my grandfather had said before he died. "That's their weakness. That's your weapon." I started my car and drove home, my mind already working through possibilities. They thought they had ended my career. They thought they had silenced me. They thought that 2 weeks severance and a neutral reference was enough to make me disappear quietly into the void of unemployed black professionals who had been not quite the right fit. They were wrong. That night, I sat in my apartment and pulled out every document I had ever saved. Every email, every performance review, every record of every project I had completed. I had learned early in my career to document everything, to create paper trails, to never trust verbal promises or handshake agreements. My father had taught me that. A black man's word might not mean nothing to them, he said, but paperwork is harder to deny. I also pulled out something else, a business plan I had been developing for 3 years. A plan for a competing firm, one built on the principles of equity and excellence that Hartwell and Associates claimed to value but never practiced. I had the knowledge, I had the client relationships, I had the skills. What I didn't have was capital, but I knew someone who did. My uncle Joseph had made his fortune in real estate during the 1990s, buying up properties in neighborhoods that white investors considered too risky, which meant too black. He had seen what others couldn't, that these communities were filled with hard-working people who would pay their rent on time, who would maintain their properties with pride, who just needed someone to believe in them. Uncle Joseph had offered me money before, multiple times. I had always refused, determined to make it on my own, to prove that I could succeed in their world by their rules. But their rules had never been designed for people who looked like me. Their rules were a maze with no exit, a game where the goalposts moved every time I got close. It was time to stop playing their game and start playing my own. I called Uncle Joseph that night. "They finally did it, huh?" he said when I told him what happened. "You don't sound surprised." "Boy, I've been waiting for this call for 4 years. I told you when you took that job, those people don't want you to succeed. They want you to be good enough to make them money, but never good enough to threaten their positions." "I know," I said. "I thought I could change things from the inside." Uncle Joseph laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your generation always thinks that. My generation learned the hard way that you can't renovate a house that's built on a rotten foundation. You got to tear it down and build something new. That's why I'm calling," I said. "I have a plan." I told him everything, not just about the firm I wanted to start, but about something else. Something I had discovered during my 4 years at Hartwell and Associates, something that Oliver and James and Liam didn't know I knew. Hartwell and Associates was in trouble, serious trouble. The founder's grandson had been running the company into the ground with bad investments, lavish spending, and a complete lack of strategic vision. They were hemorrhaging clients. They were drowning in debt, and they were about to face a reckoning that would make my termination look like a minor inconvenience. "How do you know all this?" Uncle Joseph asked. "Because they never thought to be careful around me," I said. "They talked openly in front of me like I was furniture, like I was invisible. They left documents on shared drives that I had access to. They CC'd me on emails they shouldn't have because they needed me to do the actual work, while they took the credit." Uncle Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "How much do you need?" I told him the number. "That's a lot of money, Marcus." "It's an investment," I said. "Not in a company, in justice." Another long pause. Then, "I'll have the funds transferred tomorrow, but I want you to promise me something. Anything. When you win, and you will win, I want you to remember every young black man and woman coming up behind you. I want you to open doors. I want you to build bridges. I want you to be the person we never had." "I promise," I said. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and refined my plan, checked my numbers, prepared my strategy. The turkey sandwich was still sitting in my stomach, still dry, still unsatisfying. But for the first time in 4 years, I felt full. 6 months. That's how long it took to build Ascend Financial Partners from an idea into a reality. 6 months of 18-hour days, endless phone calls, and careful, methodical execution of every step in my plan. I started by reaching out to every client I had ever worked with at Hartwell and Associates, not to poach them, but to let them know I was available for consultation. The non-compete clause in my contract was carefully worded, and I had studied it thoroughly before signing 4 years ago. It prevented me from directly soliciting clients for 12 months, but it said nothing about clients who reached out to me independently. And reach out they did. The Henderson family, whose account I had managed for 3 years, called me within a week of my termination. "We heard what happened," Patricia Henderson said. "We're not renewing with Hartwell. We want to work with you." The Okonkwo Foundation, a charitable organization I had helped structure for maximum tax efficiency, followed shortly after. "You're the only one who ever actually listened to us," Dr. Emmanuel Okonkwo told me. "Oliver Hartwell couldn't pronounce our name correctly after 2 years. You learned it on the first day." One by one they came. Not all of them. Some were too entangled with Hartwell, too afraid of burning bridges. But enough to give Ascend Financial Partners a foundation, a reputation, a future. I rented a small office space in a building owned by a friend of Uncle Joseph's, a black woman named Lorraine, who had built her property management company from nothing. She gave me a break on the rent and asked for nothing in return except a promise to pay it forward someday. I hired carefully. My first employee was Elijah Washington, a brilliant young accountant who had been working at a big firm downtown, grinding himself to dust for partners who would never see him as anything more than a diversity statistic. I offered him less money, but more opportunity, a chance to build something. to own a piece of something, to be valued for his mind rather than his melanin. "Why me?" Elijah asked during our interview. "Because I've read your work," I said, "and because I know what it's like to be the smartest person in the room and have everyone treat you like the help." He started the following Monday. My second hire was Lucas Torres, a Latino financial analyst who had been downsized from a firm in Miami. His former boss had told him he was too passionate and needed to be more neutral in his presentations. Code for "stop making us uncomfortable by being better than us." Lucas had fire in him. The same fire I had, and I knew that fire could either destroy you or forge you into something unbreakable. Together we built. But building Ascend wasn't the only thing I was doing during those 6 months. I was also watching, waiting, gathering information. My source inside Hartwell and Associates was unexpected. Noah Kim, the IT director, a quiet Korean-American man who had worked there for 15 years and had seen everything. Noah had reached out to me a month after my termination, meeting me at a coffee shop far from the office. "I always respected you, Marcus," he said. "You were the only one who ever asked me about my family, who remembered my daughter's name, who treated me like a human being instead of the computer guy. Why are you telling me this?" Noah looked around nervously. "Because they're going to destroy themselves, and when they do, I don't want to be standing in the rubble. I have 2 kids. I need to find somewhere else to land." "What do you mean?" "Destroy themselves?" And then Noah told me everything. Oliver Hartwell III had been cooking the books for 3 years. Not dramatically, he wasn't smart enough for that, but consistently. He had been hiding losses from the board, inflating revenue projections, and using client funds to cover operating expenses in ways that violated at least 6 federal regulations. James Crawford knew about it and had been helping cover it up, terrified of losing his job. Liam Patterson was in deepest. He had been siphoning money into a shell company that only existed on paper. "Why haven't they been caught?" I asked. "Because the auditors they use are Oliver's fraternity brothers," Noah said. "They've been rubber stamping everything for years, but that's about to change. The SEC has started asking questions. Someone filed a complaint." "Who?" Noah shrugged. "Anonymous. But whoever it was, they knew exactly where to look." I kept my face neutral, but inside I was smiling. The complaint had been mine. Filed 8 months ago before they even fired me. I had known something was wrong for years. The numbers never quite added up. The explanations were always too vague. The secrecy was too intense. I had started documenting discrepancies, saving emails, building a case. Not because I planned to use it, but because my father had taught me to always have an exit strategy. "When they fired me," I said to Noah, "did they know I knew?" "No. They fired you because Oliver's wife saw you talking to her at the Christmas party and got jealous. She thought you were flirting with her." I almost laughed. I had been explaining to Mrs. Hartwell how compound interest worked because she had asked. That was it. A professional conversation with a client's spouse, and it had cost me my job because a white woman's discomfort was worth more than a black man's career. "That's absurd," I said. "That's Hartwell," Noah replied. "Over the following months, Noah fed me information, and I fed it to the right people. Not directly. I was too smart for that. I had a friend from business school who worked at a financial news outlet, and I made sure certain documents found their way to her desk. I had a contact at the SEC from my days preparing for the CPA exam, and I made sure certain questions were raised through appropriate channels. But the biggest move was yet to come. Hartwell and Associates was structured as a private company with a complex ownership arrangement. The founding family, Oliver's branch, controlled 45%. The remaining 55% was distributed among various investors, former partners, and a handful of institutional holders who had bought in during the company's expansion phase 20 years ago. What Oliver didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that several of those institutional holders had been quietly selling their shares over the past 2 years. The company's declining performance, combined with whispers about accounting irregularities, had spooked them. They wanted out, and they wanted out quietly. Uncle Joseph helped me identify them. His connections in the financial world were deeper than I had ever realized, built over decades of being underestimated and overlooked just like me. He knew people who knew people, and those people were willing to sell. I bought my first 5% stake through a holding company called Pinnacle Investments, LLC. The name meant nothing, the paperwork was clean, and no one at Hartwell had any reason to connect it to me. Then I bought another 3%. Then another 4%. It took 8 months and nearly every dollar I had, including the money from Uncle Joseph, but by the end, Pinnacle Investments LLC controlled 23% of Hartwell and Associates. Combined with commitments I had secured from 3 other minority shareholders, people who had their own reasons to want change at the company, I controlled enough votes to demand a board seat. But I didn't want a board seat. I wanted the whole thing. The final piece fell into place on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my office at Ascend, reviewing quarterly projections with Elijah, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Oliver is going to announce emergency restructuring Monday. Company will be sold. Meeting with potential buyers Saturday. I knew immediately who it was from. Noah had given me everything I needed. I called Uncle Joseph. "It's time," I said. "You sure about this, son?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." That Saturday, while Oliver Hartwell was meeting with potential buyers in a conference room downtown, I was meeting with the company's lenders. The same lenders who held the debt that Hartwell couldn't pay, the debt that Oliver had hidden from the board, the debt that was about to bring the whole house of cards tumbling down. They were desperate. They had extended credit based on falsified financials. And if the truth came out, they would face their own regulatory scrutiny. They needed someone to take this problem off their hands, someone who could come in, clean up the mess, and make them whole. I offered them a deal. I would assume the debt at 70 cents on the dollar in exchange for conversion rights that would give me majority ownership if the company failed to meet certain performance benchmarks. Benchmarks that, given what I knew about the company's true financial position, they would never meet. The lenders agreed. The documents were signed, and just like that, Marcus Williams, the man who had been fired during his lunch break, escorted out like a criminal, offered 2 weeks' severance like a tip for a waiter, became the majority owner of Hartwell and Associates. But I wasn't done. The best part was yet to come. I spent the rest of the weekend preparing. I called my attorney, I called my accountant, I called every member of the board who wasn't named Hartwell and informed them of the change in ownership. Some were shocked, some were relieved. One, an older white woman named Margaret Chen, who had always treated me with respect, actually laughed. "That arrogant little fool never saw it coming, did he?" she said. "No, ma'am," I replied. "He never did." Monday morning arrived clear and bright. I put on my best suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, purchased with the first profits from Ascend Financial Partners. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw my father's eyes. My mother's determination, my grandfather's quiet strength. "Today," I said to my reflection, "we settle all debts." The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I arrived at 9:45, walking into the building I had been escorted out of 8 months ago. The security guard at the front desk, not Darnell. He had quit months ago, looked at me with confusion. "Can I help you, sir?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here for the board meeting. My name is Marcus Williams. I'm the new majority owner." The guard's face went pale. He picked up the phone, stammered something into it, and then looked at me with wide eyes. They're expecting you in the main conference room, sir." "I know," I said. "I called the meeting." I walked through the office, and this time the eyes on me were different. Not pitying, not dismissive. Afraid. Word had spread over the weekend, and now every employee in the building knew that the man they had watched being humiliated was coming back as their boss. The conference room doors were closed when I arrived. I could hear raised voices inside, Oliver's voice, panicked and shrill. I took a breath, straightened my tie, and pushed open the doors. The room went silent. Oliver Hartwell III sat at the head of the table, his face the color of old paper. James Crawford sat to his right, looking like he might vomit. Liam Patterson wasn't there. I would learn later that he had fled the country over the weekend, one step ahead of the federal investigators who were about to arrest him. The other board members were present, along with the company's lawyers, who looked at me with expressions ranging from respect to resignation. "Good morning," I said, taking my seat at the opposite end of the table from Oliver. "I believe we have some business to discuss." The silence in that conference room was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It pressed against the walls, filled every corner, made the air thick and hard to breathe. Oliver Hartwell III stared at me from the other end of the table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. "This is—" Oliver started, his voice cracking. "This is impossible. This is some kind of joke. I assure you, Mr. Hartwell, there is nothing funny about this situation." I placed a folder on the table and slid it toward the center. "These are the documents confirming Pinnacle Investments LLC as the majority shareholder of Hartwell and Associates. That's my company, in case you were wondering. I also hold conversion rights on your outstanding debt, which, as of this morning, I have exercised." Margaret Chen, the board member who had always treated me fairly, picked up the folder and began reviewing the documents. Her expression didn't change, but I saw a small smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "The documents appear to be in order," she said. "This is fraud," James Crawford sputtered. You can't just buy a company from under whom?" "Mr. Crawford?" I leaned back in my chair. "From under the people who were defrauding it, from under the executives who were hiding losses from the board, from under the men who were siphoning company funds into shell corporations." The color drained from James's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Then let me refresh your memory." I pulled out another folder, thicker this time, filled with documents I had been collecting for years. "These are internal communications between you, Mr. Hartwell, and Mr. Patterson regarding the manipulation of quarterly reports. These are bank records showing transfers to Patterson Holdings, a company that exists only on paper. And these are the falsified audit reports that you submitted to your investors and regulators." I spread the documents across the table like a dealer laying out cards. Each page was another nail in their coffin, another piece of evidence that they had built their empire on lies and theft and the assumption that no one would ever hold them accountable. "Where did you get these?" Oliver's voice was barely a whisper. "You gave them to me," I said. "Every time you CC'd me on an email I shouldn't have seen. Every time you left sensitive documents on shared drives. Every time you talked openly in front of me, like I was invisible, like I was furniture, like I was too stupid or too insignificant to understand what I was hearing." I stood and walked slowly around the table, letting each step echo in the silence. "You know what the irony is, Oliver? I actually liked this company when I started. I believed in what we could build. I thought that if I worked hard enough, performed well enough, proved myself enough, I would eventually earn my place at this table. But that was never going to happen, was it?" Oliver said nothing. "Was it?" I repeated, stopping directly behind his chair. "No," he finally said, the word barely audible. "No, because it was never about performance. It was never about merit or skill or dedication. It was about the fact that I was black in a space you believed belonged to people who looked like you. You tolerated me because I made you money, but you never respected me. You never saw me as an equal. You saw me as a tool to be used and discarded when I was no longer convenient." I returned to my seat, but I didn't sit down. I wanted to look down at them the way they had looked down at me for 4 years. Do you remember what you told me when you fired me, Oliver? You said it was about cultural fit. You said the partners had concerns about my communication style. You said I lacked leadership presence. Do you remember that? Marcus, let me tell you what I remember. I remember being interrupted every time I spoke in meetings. I remember watching my ideas get ignored when I presented them, only to be praised when a white colleague presented the same idea a week later. I remember being asked if I played basketball 3 times in my first month because you people are so athletic. I remember being called aggressive for raising my voice the exact same amount as my white colleagues. I remember being followed by security in my own building because someone didn't recognize me, despite my badge being clearly visible. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Some of them had witnessed these things. Some of them had participated in them. None of them had ever said anything. I remember being passed over for 4 promotions in 4 years, watching men with half my qualifications and a quarter of my results get elevated while I was told to be patient. I remember training those same men, teaching them everything I knew, and then watching them take credit for my work. And I remember being fired during my lunch break because your wife thought I was flirting with her when I was explaining compound interest. Oliver's head snapped up. How do you know about that? Because you underestimated everyone, Oliver, not just me, every person in this company who wasn't part of your little club. You thought loyalty could be bought with paychecks, but real loyalty is earned through respect, and you never respected anyone. I finally sat down, placing my hands flat on the table. Here is what's going to happen. Mr. Hartwell, you will resign from all positions immediately. You will surrender any remaining equity in the company as part of a settlement that my lawyers have already drafted. In exchange, I will not pursue criminal charges for the fraud you've perpetrated over the past 3 years. You can't prove... I can prove everything, I said calmly. I have bank records, communications, testimony from employees who are very eager to cooperate now that they understand the situation. The SEC has already been notified. The only question is whether you leave quietly with whatever dignity you can salvage or whether you leave in handcuffs. Oliver looked around the table, searching for allies. He found none. The other board members wouldn't meet his eyes. His lawyers were studying their notes, like their lives depended on it. James, Oliver said, turning to his head of HR, tell them this is ridiculous. Tell them Mr. Crawford will also be resigning, I continued. His involvement in the cover-up is well documented. I'm offering him the same deal, resignation and cooperation in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution. James looked like he might cry. Marcus, I have a family. I have children. I know, I said. I know the names of your children. I know where they go to school. I remember asking about them every time we passed in the hallway, and I remember you never once asked about my life in return. But I'm not like you, James. I don't punish children for the sins of their parents. You will have time to find new employment. You will have a chance to rebuild. That's more than you ever gave me. The room was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now, not the silence of shock, but the silence of surrender. What about the employees? Margaret Chen asked. What are your plans for the company? The employees who had no involvement in the fraud will keep their jobs, I said. I'm bringing in a new leadership team, people I trust, people who have proven their integrity. We will conduct a full audit, implement proper oversight, and rebuild this company on a foundation of transparency and fairness. And the clients? Many of them have already expressed support for the transition. They know who was actually doing the work. They know who they can trust. I paused. I've spent the last 8 months building Ascend Financial Partners, a company founded on the principles that Hartwell claimed to represent, but never practiced. Ascend will continue to operate independently, but we will work closely with the restructured Hartwell to ensure continuity for clients. Margaret nodded slowly. It's a good plan. It's the only plan, I said. This company can still do good work, serve good people, create good opportunities, but not with the people who corrupted it at the helm. I turned back to Oliver, who had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. His designer suit suddenly looked rumpled, ill-fitting. His perfectly groomed hair seemed thin and sparse. The confidence that had radiated from him every day for 4 years was gone, replaced by something small and desperate. I want you to understand something, Oliver. This isn't about revenge. If I wanted revenge, I would have let you crash and burn on your own. I would have let the SEC investigation destroy you while I watched from the sidelines. I could have done that. I almost did. Then why? Oliver asked, his voice hollow. Why go through all this? Because my grandfather marched with Dr. King. Because my father worked his whole life for a company that threw him away like garbage. Because my mother cleaned houses for people who called her family, but never treated her like one. Because every black man and woman in this country has a story like mine, of being underestimated, overlooked, pushed aside, and dismissed. I leaned forward. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this for every person who was ever told they weren't the right fit. Every person who was ever called aggressive for advocating for themselves. Every person who was ever made to feel invisible in rooms they had every right to occupy. I'm doing this because someone has to prove that the game isn't over just because they rigged the rules. I stood and buttoned my jacket. You have until the end of the day to sign the resignation papers. If they're not signed by 5 o'clock, my lawyers will file criminal complaints with the federal prosecutor's office. Your choice. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back one final time. One more thing. Darnell, the security guard who escorted me out 8 months ago. I want him offered a position in our executive training program. Full scholarship, full salary during training, guaranteed placement upon completion. He deserves a chance to build something better than standing at a desk watching other people live their dreams. That's very generous, Margaret said. No, I said, it's just fair. Something this company forgot how to be a long time ago. I left the conference room and walked through the office one last time. The employees watched me with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Some looked relieved, some looked scared. All of them looked like they were seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. I found Noah Kim at his desk in the IT department. He looked up as I approached, and I saw tears in his eyes. You did it, he said. You actually did it. We did it, I said. I couldn't have done this without you. I handed him an envelope. This is a job offer. Director of Technology at Ascend Financial Partners. Better salary, better benefits, better future. You don't have to decide now, but I hope you'll consider it. Noah took the envelope with shaking hands. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, and say you'll join me for lunch next week, my treat. I know a great sandwich shop, much better than the vending machine here. He laughed. A real laugh, the kind I had never heard from him in all the years we had worked together. I left the building and stepped out into the Atlanta sunshine. The heat wrapped around me, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like an embrace, like the city itself was welcoming me back. My phone buzzed. A text from Uncle Joseph. Heard it went well. Proud of you, son. I typed back, Thank you for believing in me. His response came immediately. I always believed in you. You just needed to believe in yourself. I got in my car and drove to Ascend Financial Partners, where Elijah and Lucas were waiting with a bottle of champagne they had bought with their own money. To the boss, Elijah said, raising his glass. To the future, I corrected him, to all of us. We drank and laughed and talked about everything we were going to build, a company that valued people for their contributions, not their connections, A company that saw diversity as a strength, not a checkbox. A company that proved every single day that excellence could come from anywhere if you just gave people a chance. Later that night, I sat alone in my office, looking out at the city lights. I thought about my father, who had never lived to see this day. I thought about my mother, who called me that evening crying happy tears. I thought about my grandfather, who had survived things I could barely imagine so that I could have opportunities he never had. I thought about Oliver Hartwell, whose resignation papers had been signed and submitted at 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before my deadline. He had lost everything, not because of some external force, but because of the rot at the center of his own character. And I thought about all the people who would come after me. The young black professionals just starting their careers, facing the same obstacles I had faced, fighting the same battles I had fought. They would need champions. They would need allies. They would need proof that the system could be beaten, that justice was possible, that their dreams were valid. I picked up a pen and started writing a letter to my future employees, my future partners, my future community. A letter about what we stood for and what we would never stand for. A letter about hope. Because in the end, that's what this was really about. Not revenge, not money, not power. Not hope. The hope that things could be different. The hope that merit could matter more than melanin. The hope that America could live up to its promises instead of just making them. I signed the letter and set it aside. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. There would be people who tried to tear down what we were building, who would resent our success, who would use every weapon in their arsenal to maintain the status quo. But tonight, just for tonight, I allowed myself to feel victory. Not the triumphant, chest-pounding victory of war movies, but the quiet, profound victory of a man who had refused to let his circumstances define his destiny. They had fired me during my lunch break. They had underestimated me because of the color of my skin. They had thought they could discard me like trash and never face consequences. They had been wrong about everything. And now, finally, they knew it. I turned off the office light and went home to sleep, the first peaceful sleep I had had in 4 years. Tomorrow, we would build something beautiful.